From the barefoot tobacco farm tomboy who climbed water towers and fought with bronze ashtrays, to the Hollywood goddess who danced flamenco until dawn and once met J.R.R. Tolkien without either knowing why the other was famous, Ava Gardner's real life was wilder than any script. Here are 15 things you never knew about Ava Gardner. Fact 1. Her screen test was silent because of her accent. When 18-year-old Ava Gardner walked into the Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer offices in New York City for her very first screen test in 1941, she had absolutely no idea that her thick North Carolina accent would completely derail the audition before it even began. The young woman from the tiny farming community of Grabtown had never acted before in her life, and she was already nervous about reading from a sample film script when something unexpected happened that would change everything. As soon as Ava started speaking, the casting director Marvin Schenk realized he couldn't understand a single word she was saying. Her heavy southern drawl was so thick and unfamiliar to the Hollywood executives that they literally could not make out what she was trying to communicate. Instead of sending her home, Schenk made a quick decision that would prove to be brilliant. He told Ava to come back the next day for a completely silent screen test, where she wouldn't need to speak at all. The next day, with cameras rolling, the nervous teenager was given the simplest possible directions. All she had to do was walk toward the camera, turn around, walk away, and then rearrange some flowers in a vase. That was it. No dialogue, no acting experience required. Just basic movement and natural presence. The moment Ava stepped in front of that camera, something magical happened that had nothing to do with her voice. Her natural beauty and screen presence were so striking that the camera seemed to love her instantly. The test footage was so impressive that it prompted one director to clap his hands together and shout the now famous words that would launch her career. The silent screen test that was meant to work around her incomprehensible accent ended up proving that sometimes the most powerful performances don't require any words at all. Fact 2. She nearly killed Howard Hughes with a bell. One of the most shocking moments in Ava Gardner's personal life involved a violent confrontation with billionaire Howard Hughes that nearly turned deadly, and it happened because Hughes had a disturbing habit of showing up uninvited in the middle of the night. Their on-and-off relationship lasted for more than 20 years, but it was filled with jealousy, obsession, and increasingly dangerous behavior from the eccentric aviator and movie mogul. On this particular night, Ava woke up alone in her bed to find Hughes standing over her in the darkness, convinced that her ex-husband Mickey Rooney was somehow still sleeping with her, even though they were already divorced. Instead of apologizing for breaking into her home, Hughes became violent and pinned her down on the bed. What happened next was a brutal assault where he repeatedly hit her across the face with an open hand until her eye was swollen completely shut. Fearing for her life and desperate to defend herself, Ava reached around frantically for anything she could use as a weapon. Her hand found the handle of a heavy bronze ornamental bell that was sitting nearby, and without hesitation, she grabbed it and threw it as hard as she could directly at Hughes's head. The bell struck him with such force that it split his face open from his temple all the way down to his mouth, knocking him unconscious instantly. The aftermath of the fight was horrifying to witness, with blood splattered across the walls and furniture throughout the room. Ava was left with a black eye and serious injuries, while Hughes had to be rushed to the hospital for emergency treatment. Despite the violence and trauma of that night, their twisted relationship somehow continued for years afterward, though Ava later reflected that she thought she might have actually killed him when she saw all that blood. Fact 3. Her famous studio quote was backwards. One of the most famous quotes in Hollywood history about Ava Gardner has been told wrong for decades, and the mix-up reveals just how much movie studio mythology can twist the truth over time. For years, people have repeated the story that MGM studio head Louis B. Mayer took one look at the young woman from North Carolina and declared, "She can't act, she can't talk, she's terrific, sign her." But the reality of what actually happened during her screen test is completely different from this legendary version. The truth is that Louis B. Mayer never said those words at all, and he wasn't even in the room when Ava Gardner did her screen test in New York. The famous quote actually came from a director who was watching the footage after her silent audition, where she had been asked to simply walk around and arrange flowers because no one could understand her thick Southern accent. When this unnamed director saw how naturally beautiful and photogenic she looked on camera, he was the one who clapped his hands together and shouted those now famous words about her inability to act or speak clearly. What makes this mix-up even more interesting is how it happened in the first place. Over the years, As the story was retold again and again in Hollywood circles and eventually in books and interviews, people started attributing the quote to the most powerful person they could think of at MGM, which was Louis B. Mayer himself. It made for a better story to have the legendary studio boss making this snap decision about a future star, rather than some anonymous director whose name has been lost to history. The real Louis B. Mayer actually sent a telegram to his New York office after seeing the screen test footage, but his message was much more straightforward and businesslike. He simply told them to offer Ava Gardner a standard 7-year contract, which was the normal starting arrangement for new actors at the time. Fact 4. She climbed water towers as a child. Long before Ava Gardner became known for her fearless attitude in Hollywood, she was already showing signs of being absolutely fearless as a little girl growing up in rural North Carolina during the 1920s. When she was just 6 years old, little curly-haired Ava managed to terrify her entire neighborhood by doing something that most adults would never even consider attempting, and it happened right behind the local school where everyone could see her. The incident took place when Ava's family was living at the Brogden Teacherage, which was a boarding house for female teachers at the nearby Brogden School. Her father Jonas worked as the groundskeeper for the school property, while her mother Molly served as the cook and housekeeper for the 6 young women who taught at the small rural school that only went from 1st grade through 6th grade. The family had moved there after losing their tobacco and cotton farm during the agricultural depression that hit the area in the mid-1920s. Behind the school building stood a tall water tower that was used to supply fresh water to the school and the teacherage where Ava's family lived. Most people in the community treated the water tower like any other piece of dangerous industrial equipment that children should stay far away from, but 6-year-old Ava saw it as an irresistible challenge that she simply had to conquer. One day, without telling anyone what she was planning to do, the little girl started climbing up the metal ladder that ran up the side of the tower. By the time people in the neighborhood realized what was happening, Ava had already made it all the way to the top of the water tower, high above the school grounds where she could see for miles across the rural countryside. The sight of such a young child perched so dangerously high up caused panic among the teachers, parents, and other adults who witnessed her daredevil stunt, and it became one of the most talked about incidents in the small community's recent memory. Fact 5. Her singing was dubbed, despite great effort. One of the most frustrating experiences in Ava Gardner's entire career happened when MGM decided to replace her singing voice in the 1951 musical Showboat. Even though she had worked incredibly hard to prepare for the role and had already proven she could sing beautifully in previous films, the decision to dub her voice was particularly insulting because Ava had sung in her own voice just 5 years earlier in The Killers, where her performance of a nightclub song was considered one of the highlights of the film and showed off her natural vocal abilities. When Ava was cast as Julie Laverne in Showboat, she threw herself into preparing for the musical role with complete dedication. She spent months working with vocal coaches and practicing the songs, determined to prove that she could handle the demanding musical numbers in this prestigious MGM production. The role was especially important to her because Julie Laverne was a complex, dramatic character rather than just another glamorous love interest, and Ava wanted to show her range as a performer. After all her preparation and hard work, MGM held some test screenings using Ava's actual singing voice, but the studio executives decided they weren't satisfied with the results. They brought in professional vocalist Annette Warren to dub over Ava's voice for all the musical numbers in the final version of the film, much to Ava's complete disgust and disappointment. She felt betrayed by the studio's lack of confidence in her abilities, especially since she had put so much effort into getting ready for the role. The most ironic part of this whole situation was that MGM still used Ava's own recorded versions of the songs on the official Showboat soundtrack album that was sold to the public. This meant that people who bought the record got to hear Ava's real singing voice, while moviegoers who watched the film only heard Annette Warren's dubbed vocals, creating a confusing situation that lasted for decades. Fact 6. She practiced flamenco all night long. When Ava Gardner had to learn flamenco dancing for her role in the 1954 film The Barefoot Contessa, nobody expected that this professional requirement would turn into a lifelong obsession that would completely transform how she spent her evenings for years to come. The movie called for her character to perform traditional Spanish flamenco, so the studio arranged for professional instructors to teach her the complex rhythms, hand movements, and passionate footwork that make flamenco one of the most demanding and expressive dance forms in the world. What started as just another job skill that Ava needed to master for a movie role quickly became something much more personal and consuming. She discovered that flamenco connected with something deep inside her personality, and the intense, emotional nature of the dance seemed to match her own fiery temperament perfectly. The more she learned about the intricate steps and dramatic gestures, the more she wanted to keep practicing and improving her technique, even after the cameras stopped rolling. Ava's dedication to flamenco went far beyond what anyone would consider normal or healthy, especially considering her demanding work schedule as one of Hollywood's biggest stars. She would often stay up all night long practicing her flamenco moves, dancing for hours and hours without taking breaks, driven by an almost manic energy that seemed to fuel her passion for the art form. Her friends and colleagues were amazed by how little sleep she seemed to need during this period, as she could dance until dawn and still show up ready to work on movie sets the next day. This nocturnal flamenco practice became such a regular part of Ava's routine that it continued long after the Barefoot Contessa was finished and released. She became increasingly skilled at the dance, reaching a level of proficiency that impressed even professional flamenco performers, and her all-night practice sessions became legendary among the people who knew her personally during this intense period of her life. Fact 7. An island was renamed after her. In one of the most extravagant movie publicity stunts of the 1950s, the film producers actually purchased a small tropical island in Fiji and officially renamed it Ava as part of an elaborate promotional campaign for Ava Gardner's 1957 comedy, The Little Hut. This wasn't just a temporary marketing gimmick or a fake announcement designed to get attention in the newspapers, but a real legal transaction that involved changing the official name of an actual piece of land in the South Pacific Ocean. The movie The Little Hut was a romantic comedy where Ava played a woman stranded on a desert island with two men, so the studio executives thought it would be clever to tie the tropical island theme into their advertising campaign. Instead of just using regular movie posters and magazine advertisements, they decided to go completely over the top by acquiring their own private island that they could use as the ultimate prize in a major contest promotion. The newly renamed Ava Island became the centerpiece of a sweepstakes contest where lucky winners would actually get to lease the tropical paradise for a vacation getaway. This meant that ordinary movie fans could enter the contest and potentially win the chance to spend time on an island that was literally named after one of Hollywood's biggest stars, creating a direct connection between the movie and a real-world exotic location. The promotional campaign was so unusual and attention-grabbing that it became almost more famous than the movie itself, which turned out to be one of Ava Gardner's less memorable films despite all the creative marketing efforts that surrounded it. The island stunt showed just how far movie studios were willing to go during the golden age of Hollywood to create buzz around their productions, even if it meant buying and renaming actual pieces of real estate in foreign countries just to get people talking about their latest release. Fact 8. She met J.R.R. Tolkien, and neither knew who the other was. One of the most charming and unlikely encounters in entertainment history happened when Ava Gardner, one of Hollywood's most glamorous movie stars, found herself at the same social gathering as J.R.R. Tolkien, the brilliant author who created Middle-earth and wrote The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. What makes this meeting so wonderfully amusing is that when they were introduced to each other, neither person had any idea why the other was considered famous or important enough to be at this particular event. This awkward but delightful situation probably occurred during the 1960s when Ava was living in London and moving in sophisticated intellectual circles, while Tolkien was already an established professor at Oxford University and a celebrated author, though his books hadn't yet reached the massive worldwide popularity they would achieve in later decades. At the time, it would have been perfectly reasonable for a Hollywood actress to be unfamiliar with academic fantasy literature, just as it made complete sense that a scholarly Oxford professor might not keep up with American movie stars and their latest films. The encounter highlights just how different their two worlds really were, despite both of them being creative people who had achieved remarkable success in their respective fields. Ava Gardner was known internationally for her beauty and her roles in major Hollywood productions, while Tolkien was respected in literary and academic circles for his groundbreaking work in fantasy writing and his expertise in ancient languages and mythology. Neither person felt comfortable enough to ask directly what the other person did for a living, so they apparently spent their time together making polite conversation without ever figuring out why they had been brought together at this social event. The story perfectly captures a moment when two completely different types of fame and achievement crossed paths in the most ordinary and human way possible, creating a memorable anecdote that shows how even the most famous people can sometimes feel completely out of place. Fact 9. Her real name story was made up. One of the most persistent myths about Ava Gardner was created by MGM's publicity department and became so widespread that it fooled millions of people for decades, even making its way into official textbooks and television quiz shows as accepted fact. Early in her career, a studio publicist decided to invent a completely false backstory claiming that the North Carolina farm girl's real name was actually Lucy Johnson and that Ava Gardner was just a glamorous stage name that MGM had created for her when she arrived in Hollywood. The truth is that Ava Lavinia Gardner was the name given to her at birth on Christmas Eve in 1922, chosen by her parents Jonas and Mary Elizabeth Gardner, who lived in the tiny farming community of Grabtown. She was named after a beloved aunt called Ava, while her middle name, Lavinia, was selected by her mother Molly, simply because she thought it sounded pretty and elegant for her youngest daughter. This fake name story was so convincing and was repeated so many times in magazine articles and publicity materials that it eventually took on a life of its own, spreading far beyond Hollywood and becoming accepted as historical fact by people who had no reason to doubt it. The myth became so entrenched in popular culture that it appeared as a question on the television game show Jeopardy, where contestants were expected to know that Ava Gardner's real name was Lucy Johnson, which was completely incorrect information. Even more surprisingly, the false story found its way into North Carolina fourth-grade social studies textbooks during the 1990s, meaning that children in her home state were being taught the wrong information about one of their most famous native daughters. The persistence of this myth shows just how powerful movie studio publicity machines were during the golden age of Hollywood, and how easily made-up stories could become accepted as truth when they were repeated often enough by authoritative sources. Fact 10. She did her own dangerous stunts at age 52. When Ava Gardner was cast in the 1974 disaster movie Earthquake at the age of 52, everyone expected that she would follow the normal Hollywood practice of letting professional stunt doubles handle all the dangerous action sequences, while she focused on the dramatic scenes. Instead, she completely shocked director Mark Robson and the entire film crew by insisting that she wanted to perform her own stunts, even though the movie called for some genuinely hazardous situations that could have seriously injured someone who wasn't trained for that kind of physical work. The earthquake disaster scenes in the movie required actors to navigate through collapsing buildings and debris-filled streets, while massive chunks of concrete, heavy steel pipes, and other dangerous props were falling all around them. These sequences were carefully choreographed to look realistic and terrifying, but they still involved real physical risks that most actors would never consider taking on themselves, especially performers who were in their 50s and didn't have any background in stunt work or athletic training. Despite the obvious dangers and the concerns of the safety coordinators on set, Ava refused to step aside and let a stunt double take over for the action scenes. She was determined to do all of her own work, dodging the falling concrete blocks and navigating around the heavy steel pipes that were being dropped and thrown around the set to create the chaos of a major earthquake. Her fearless attitude and physical commitment to these scenes impressed everyone who witnessed her performances, though it also made the director and crew members extremely nervous about her safety. This wasn't just a publicity stunt or a brief moment of showing off for the cameras, but a sustained commitment throughout the entire filming process to handle her own action sequences, no matter how dangerous they became. Ava's insistence on doing her own stunts at an age when most actors would be avoiding physical risks showed that she still had the same fearless spirit that had made her climb water towers as a 6-year-old child. Fact 11. Her 3 husbands had 20 wives total. One of the most remarkable statistics about Ava Gardner's personal life becomes clear when you add up all the marriages of the 3 men she chose to wed during her lifetime, revealing that Mickey Rooney, Artie Shaw, and Frank Sinatra collectively married a staggering total of 20 different women between them throughout their various romantic careers. This incredible number shows that Ava had a particular talent for falling in love with men who seemed to treat marriage as a hobby rather than a permanent commitment. Mickey Rooney, who was Ava's first husband when she married him in 1942 at the age of 19, went on to become one of Hollywood's most prolific grooms by marrying a total of 8 different women during his long life. His brief marriage to Ava lasted only about a year before they divorced in 1943. But Rooney continued his pattern of short-lived marriages for decades afterward, making headlines regularly with his frequent trips to the altar and equally frequent divorces. Artie Shaw, the brilliant jazz musician and bandleader who became Ava's second husband in 1945, managed to accumulate 8 wives of his own during his lifetime, making him just as marriage-happy as Mickey Rooney. Shaw was known for being an intellectual who attracted sophisticated women, but he apparently had trouble maintaining long-term relationships despite his charm and musical genius. Frank Sinatra, who was the love of Ava's life and her third and final husband from 1951 to 1957, was slightly more restrained than her first 2 husbands, but still managed to marry 4 different women during his career. Even though Ava and Frank remained close friends after their divorce and many people believed they never truly got over each other, Sinatra continued to seek marriage with other partners, adding to the impressive collective total of 20 marriages among the 3 men who had captured Ava Gardner's heart. Fact 12. She cursed like a sailor and truck driver combined. Despite her glamorous image as one of Hollywood's most beautiful and sophisticated leading ladies, Ava Gardner had a vocabulary that could shock even the most rough-and-tumble people she encountered, and this became especially apparent during interviews with journalists who were completely unprepared for her colorful language. Her reputation for creative profanity was well known among the people who worked with her regularly, but it came as a complete surprise to reporters who expected to meet a polite and refined movie star who would give them typical celebrity responses. One Australian journalist who had the memorable experience of interviewing Ava during her later career was so impressed by her swearing abilities that he felt compelled to write about it in detail, describing her profanity skills as being like a sailor and a truck driver were having a competition. This wasn't just occasional mild cursing, or the kind of language that might slip out during moments of frustration, but a sustained and creative use of profanity that demonstrated both her natural intelligence and her complete lack of concern about maintaining a ladylike image for the press. The same Australian reporter noted that Ava's impressive vocabulary came with a fiery temper to match, and during their interview she became so annoyed with his questions that she actually threw a glass of champagne directly at him. Even in that moment of anger and alcohol throwing, the journalist couldn't help but be struck by how beautiful she looked, later writing that, "The only thing I could think was how bloody gorgeous the woman was, even as champagne was dripping down his face." This combination of stunning beauty and sailor-level profanity was something that Ava had developed during her childhood growing up on a tobacco farm in rural North Carolina, where she learned what she called her lifelong love of earthy language from working alongside farmers and laborers who didn't worry about speaking politely in front of children. Fact 13. She was discovered by a fake talent scout. The story of how Ava Gardner was discovered and launched into stardom is one of the most accidental career breaks in Hollywood history. And it all happened because a young man named Barney Doohan was pretending to be something he absolutely was not, in order to impress women and get their phone numbers. Doohan worked as a low-level errand boy in the legal department of Loews Theaters, which happened to own MGM Studios, but he had no real connection to the movie business and certainly no authority to scout for new talent or make career-changing decisions about aspiring actors. In the summer of 1941, Doohan was walking past a photography studio on Fifth Avenue in New York City when he spotted a stunning portrait of 18-year-old Ava Gardner displayed in the front window. The photograph had been taken by Larry Tarr, who was married to Ava's older sister Beatrice, during a visit when Ava came up from North Carolina to spend time with her family. Doohan was so struck by Ava's beauty that he immediately went into the studio and tried to get her contact information by claiming that he was a talent scout for Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer. The receptionist at the photography studio was smart enough to see through Doohan's act and refused to give him Ava's phone number, but when Larry Tarr heard about someone from MGM asking about his sister-in-law, he thought it sounded like a real opportunity. Tarr and his wife Beatrice decided to take the situation seriously and spent all night in the darkroom making professional prints of Ava's photographs, which they then personally delivered to MGM's New York offices the next day. This led to a real talent scout named Marvin Schenk becoming interested in Ava and arranging for her screen test, which ultimately resulted in her 7-year contract with MGM and her entire Hollywood career, all because a young man had been dishonestly trying to pick up women by pretending to work in the movie business. Fact 14. Gregory Peck adopted her dog after she died. When Ava Gardner died in London on January 25, 1990, at the age of 67, she left behind 2 loyal companions who had been her constant sources of comfort during the final years of her life when she had become increasingly reclusive and isolated from the Hollywood world that had made her famous. These were her beloved Welsh corgi named Morgan and her devoted housekeeper Carmen Vargas, who had taken care of Ava through her declining health and the strokes that had left her partially paralyzed during her last years. Ava had always been thoughtful about making sure that the people and animals she cared about would be looked after when she was gone, and she had made arrangements to ensure that both Carmen Vargas and Morgan would have secure homes after her death. The person she chose to take responsibility for both of them was Gregory Peck, the legendary actor who had been her co-star and close friend for many years, having worked with her in several films including The Snows of Kilimanjaro and The Great Sinner. Gregory Peck was known throughout Hollywood as one of the most decent and honorable men in the business, someone who could be trusted to keep his word and treat people with kindness and respect, which made him the perfect choice for this important responsibility. When Ava passed away, Peck immediately welcomed both Carmen Vargas and Morgan into his own household, ensuring that they would continue to live together and maintain the bond they had formed during their years of caring for Ava. This generous act showed the deep friendship and mutual respect that had existed between Ava Gardner and Gregory Peck, and it demonstrated Peck's character that he was willing to take on the long-term care of both a person and a pet simply because his friend had trusted him to do the right thing. Carmen Vargas and Morgan were able to stay together in a loving home where they were treated as family rather than as burdens or obligations. Fact 15. She wanted to be Mrs. Robinson. In one of the most surprising casting stories of the 1960s, Ava Gardner actively campaigned to play the iconic role of Mrs. Robinson in the groundbreaking film The Graduate, even though director Mike Nichols had never seriously considered her for the part that would eventually make Anne Bancroft famous and help define a generation's view of forbidden relationships between older women and younger men. Ava's pursuit of this role showed that she was still eager to take on challenging and provocative characters even during the later stages of her career. When Ava heard about the film project, she took the unusual step of personally contacting Mike Nichols to express her interest in playing the seductive older woman who has an affair with a recent college graduate played by Dustin Hoffman. She called the director directly and said with characteristic bluntness, "I want to see you. I want to talk about this graduate thing." This direct approach was typical of Ava's straightforward personality, and it caught Nichols completely off guard since he hadn't been thinking of her for the role at all. Mike Nichols was polite enough to agree to meet with Ava at her hotel, even though he had no intention of casting her as Mrs. Robinson. He later recalled that their meeting was a fascinating experience because Ava seemed to go through every classic movie star behavior during their conversation, sitting at a small French desk with a telephone and displaying all the dramatic gestures and mannerisms that people expected from Hollywood legends of her era. Despite Ava's enthusiasm for the project and her willingness to take on such a bold and sexually charged role, Nichols ultimately decided that she wasn't right for the part, and the role went to Anne Bancroft instead. The meeting remained a memorable encounter for the director, who was impressed by Ava's professionalism and her genuine interest in continuing to challenge herself with complex and unconventional characters.